When Queen Camilla slammed the door of her Range Rover and stepped onto the gravel driveway of Highgrove House that crisp October morning, she had no idea that her next decision would send shockwaves through the British monarchy, spark international headlines, and leave a decorated royal guard shouting in disbelief. What started as a simple disagreement over royal protocol would escalate into one of the most talked-about incidents in recent royal history, testing the limits of tradition, respect, and the delicate balance of power within the House of Windsor. The world was about to witness a side of Queen Camilla that few had ever seen before: bold, uncompromising, and willing to break centuries-old customs to make her point. But as the dust settled and the cameras stopped rolling, everyone would be asking the same question: had the Queen gone too far, or was this exactly what the monarchy needed to step into the modern age? The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine gardens of Highgrove House as Queen Camilla Parker Bowles stepped out of her beloved Range Rover. The vehicle, a deep forest green that matched the rolling hills of Gloucestershire, had been her companion for countless journeys across the British countryside. Today, however, this simple act of parking would become the catalyst for an incident that would dominate headlines for weeks to come. Sergeant Major William Thompson had been stationed at various royal residences for over 15 years. His military bearing was impeccable, his uniform pressed to perfection, and his dedication to royal protocol was unwavering. He had served 3 monarchs during his career, each with their own quirks and preferences, but he had never encountered a situation quite like the one that was about to unfold on this seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning. Camilla had always been known for her independent spirit. Even before marrying King Charles, she had maintained a down-to-earth approach that sometimes clashed with the rigid formalities of royal life. Her friends often described her as refreshingly normal, someone who could discuss gardening with the same enthusiasm as state affairs. This morning, she was dressed casually in a cream-colored sweater and dark trousers, her hair styled in its characteristic elegant waves. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had finally found her place in a world that had once seemed unwelcoming. The Range Rover had been a gift from Charles during their courtship years, long before their marriage became a reality. It represented freedom to Camilla, a way to escape the suffocating protocols of royal life, and simply drive through the countryside she loved so much. The vehicle had seen countless adventures, from impromptu visits to local pubs to long drives through Scotland's highlands. Its leather seats bore the gentle wear of years of use, and the dashboard held small mementos from their travels together. As Camilla approached the main entrance of Highgrove, Sergeant Major Thompson stepped forward with his usual crisp salute. The morning routine was well established. The Queen would be escorted to the main house, her schedule would be reviewed, and the day's activities would proceed with military precision. What Thompson didn't anticipate was Camilla's sudden stop and the determined expression that crossed her face. The previous week had been particularly challenging for the royal family. A series of negative press stories had criticized the monarchy's relevance in modern Britain, and several high-profile politicians had made pointed comments about the cost of maintaining royal residences. Camilla had grown increasingly frustrated with what she perceived as unnecessary restrictions on her movements and activities. She felt that the constant presence of security details and rigid protocols were preventing her from connecting authentically with the British people. Earlier that morning, Camilla had received a phone call from her sister, Annabelle, who lived in a modest cottage just 30 miles away. Annabelle had mentioned feeling unwell and had asked if Camilla might visit for tea later in the week. This simple request had triggered a cascade of security meetings, route planning, and protocol discussions that would take days to resolve. The bureaucracy of royal life had reached a breaking point for Camilla, and she had decided that enough was enough. Standing in the driveway of Highgrove, Camilla made a decision that would reverberate through the halls of Buckingham Palace and beyond. Instead of proceeding with her planned morning meeting with the head gardener, she turned back toward her Range Rover with purpose in her step. Sergeant Major Thompson, confused by this deviation from routine, quickened his pace to catch up with her. The relationship between Camilla and the royal protection officers had always been cordial but professional. She understood their role and generally cooperated with security protocols, though she occasionally pushed boundaries in small ways. She had a particular fondness for impromptu stops at farm shops and local cafes, much to the consternation of her security team. These spontaneous detours had become legendary among the staff, who had learned to adapt quickly to their queen's unpredictable nature. Thompson had been briefed extensively about Camilla's tendency toward independence, but His training had prepared him for minor deviations, not wholesale abandonment of scheduled activities. As he watched her stride purposefully back to the Range Rover, he felt the first stirrings of concern. Royal protection protocols were not merely suggestions. They were carefully crafted security measures designed to ensure the safety of the monarchy. The morning air carried the scent of autumn leaves and the distant sound of horses in the nearby paddocks. Highgrove had always been Charles and Camilla's sanctuary, a place where they could escape the formalities of court life and enjoy the simple pleasures of country living. The house itself was a testament to their shared love of traditional British architecture and sustainable living. Every room told a story of their life together, from the cozy library where they spent quiet evenings to the conservatory where Camilla grew her prized orchids. As Camilla reached for the driver's door handle, Thompson cleared his throat loudly, hoping to catch her attention. Royal protocol dictated that the Queen should never drive herself without proper security arrangements, especially not in an unarmored civilian vehicle. The Range Rover, while luxurious, lacked the sophisticated protection systems of the official royal fleet. It was meant for short trips within the secured perimeter of royal estates, not for journeys into the public realm. Camilla paused with her hand on the door handle and turned to face Thompson. Her expression was calm but determined, the look of someone who had made up her mind and would not be easily dissuaded. In that moment, Thompson realized that this was not going to be a simple conversation about scheduling adjustments. The Queen had clearly decided to take matters into her own hands, regardless of protocol or procedure. The silence stretched between them for several long seconds, broken only by the gentle rustling of leaves in the ancient oak trees that surrounded the property. Both individuals understood that they were standing at a crossroads that would define not only the rest of their day, but potentially their professional relationship going forward. Camilla's decision to drive herself was not merely about transportation. It was a statement about autonomy, independence, and the right to make personal choices even within the constraints of royal duty. Thompson's military training had taught him to respect the chain of command, but it had also instilled in him a deep sense of responsibility for the safety of those under his protection. The Queen's safety was his primary concern, and allowing her to leave Highgrove unprotected would be a dereliction of duty that he could not accept. Yet he also understood that Camilla was not just any member of the royal family. She was the Queen consort, with the authority to make decisions about her own activities. The tension in the air was palpable as these two strong-willed individuals prepared for what would become a defining confrontation. Neither could have predicted how dramatically this simple disagreement would escalate, or how their morning conflict would soon become the subject of intense media scrutiny and public debate. Camilla's fingers tightened around the door handle as she prepared to speak. Whatever she was about to say would set in motion a chain of events that would test the very foundations of royal protocol and challenge the traditional relationship between the monarchy and those sworn to protect it. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting everything in sharp relief as two worlds, royal independence and institutional duty, prepared to collide in spectacular fashion. Camilla's voice cut through the morning air with surprising firmness as she addressed Sergeant Major Thompson. "I'm going to visit my sister," she announced, her tone leaving little room for discussion. "She's not feeling well, and I won't have her waiting another 3 days while you people plan routes and coordinate with half of Gloucestershire." Thompson's face remained professionally neutral, but inside, his mind was racing. Royal protection protocols existed for good reason, developed over decades of experience, and refined through countless security assessments. The idea of the Queen consort driving herself in an unarmored vehicle to an unsecured location was unthinkable from a security standpoint. Yet he could see the determination in Camilla's eyes, a resolve that he had witnessed before during her more stubborn moments. "Your Majesty," Thompson began carefully, his voice maintaining the respectful tone that protocol demanded, "I must advise against this course of action. We haven't conducted advance reconnaissance of the route, and Lady Annabelle's residence hasn't been secured for a royal visit. Perhaps we could arrange for proper protection to accompany you, or alternatively, we could bring Lady Annabelle here to Highgrove, where we can ensure everyone's safety." Camilla's expression hardened at Thompson's suggestions. She had spent years adapting to the constraints of royal life, accepting that spontaneity was often the price of position. But today felt different. The mounting frustrations of recent weeks, combined with genuine concern for her sister's well-being, had crystallized into a moment of rebellion that she could no longer suppress. "Sergeant Major," she replied, her voice taking on the authoritative tone that reminded everyone present of her position. "I appreciate your concerns, but I am not a prisoner in my own home. My sister lives 30 miles away in a peaceful village where the greatest threat is likely to be an aggressive sheep. I refuse to turn a simple family visit into a military operation." The standoff between Queen and Guard was unprecedented in Thompson's experience. During his years of service, he had occasionally dealt with minor protocol disputes, but never a direct challenge to fundamental security procedures. His training had prepared him for external threats, not for situations where the principal refused to cooperate with their own protection. The manual he had studied extensively simply didn't cover scenarios where royalty actively resisted security measures. Other staff members had begun to notice the unusual scene unfolding in the driveway. Gardeners paused in their morning tasks, glancing nervously toward the confrontation while trying to appear busy with their work. The head gardener, James Worthington, had been expecting to meet with the Queen to discuss plans for the winter garden, but he sensed that his appointment would likely be postponed indefinitely. Inside the house, Charles was conducting a video conference with environmental ministers about his latest sustainability initiative. The king had no idea that his wife was currently engaged in what amounted to a diplomatic crisis with their security team. Had he known, he might have intervened, though those who knew Camilla well understood that her mind was rarely changed once she had made a firm decision. Thompson found himself in an impossible position. His duty was clear: ensure the Queen's safety at all costs. However, he had no legal authority to physically prevent her from leaving, and doing so would create an even more serious breach of protocol. The delicate balance of royal service required him to protect while respecting, to advise without commanding, and to serve without overstepping boundaries that had been carefully established over centuries. "Ma'am," Thompson tried again, his voice betraying just a hint of the stress he was feeling. "If you're determined to make this visit, please allow us to provide escort vehicles and advanced security. It would take perhaps 2 hours to arrange proper protection, and we could have you safely on your way before noon." Camilla shook her head firmly, her hand never leaving the door handle of the Range Rover. 2 hours to visit my sister? Absolutely not. This is precisely the kind of bureaucratic nonsense that prevents me from living anything resembling a normal life. I married into this family, Sergeant Major, but I didn't surrender my basic human right to check on a family member who isn't feeling well. The emotional weight behind Camilla's words revealed the deeper frustrations that had been building for months. Royal life, despite its privileges, came with constraints that few people could fully understand. Every movement was planned, every interaction monitored, and every spontaneous impulse subjected to security analysis. For someone who had lived independently for decades before joining the royal family, these restrictions felt particularly onerous. Thompson recognized the genuine emotion in the Queen's voice and felt a moment of sympathy for her position. He had children of his own and understood the desire to help family members in need. However, his professional responsibilities couldn't be set aside because of personal feelings. The safety of the monarchy was paramount, and that sometimes meant making difficult decisions that seemed unreasonable to those being protected. "Your Majesty," he said, his tone becoming more urgent, "I have a sworn duty to protect you. If something were to happen during an unsecured visit, the consequences would extend far beyond any inconvenience caused by proper security measures. The stability of the crown itself could be at risk." Camilla's response was swift and cutting. "The crown survived Diana's midnight drives through London, Sergeant Major. I think it can handle a middle-aged woman visiting her sister for afternoon tea." The reference to Princess Diana was pointed and deliberate, reminding Thompson that previous royals had successfully pushed back against excessive security restrictions. The comparison to Diana was both accurate and troubling for Thompson. The late Princess of Wales had indeed been known for her independent streak and occasional disregard for security protocols. However, her tragic death in Paris had led to significant reviews and tightening of royal protection procedures. The lessons learned from that terrible night had shaped much of the current security framework that Thompson was now being asked to ignore. As the confrontation continued, word began to spread among the staff that something unusual was happening. The household manager, Mrs. Patricia Henley, appeared at one of the upper windows, her face creased with concern as she observed the scene below. She had worked for the royal family for over 20 years and had never witnessed such a public disagreement between a member of the family and their protection team. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense as both sides held firm to their positions. Camilla remained convinced that her right to make personal choices shouldn't be completely subordinated to security concerns, while Thompson continued to insist that proper protocols couldn't be abandoned simply because they were inconvenient. Neither was willing to compromise, and the situation showed no signs of resolution. Other protection officers had begun to gather at a respectful distance, uncertain about how to proceed. Radio chatter increased as the team coordinated their response to this unprecedented situation. The chain of command was clear in most circumstances, but this scenario fell into a gray area where royal authority and security responsibilities directly conflicted. The Range Rover sat between them like a symbol of the dispute itself. To Camilla, it represented freedom and normalcy. To Thompson, it represented an unacceptable security risk. The vehicle had become the focal point of a much larger debate about the balance between protection and personal liberty within the modern monarchy. As the standoff entered its second hour, it became clear that this was no longer simply about a visit to Annabelle's cottage. The confrontation had evolved into a test of wills that would determine the boundaries of royal independence and the limits of security authority. Neither Camilla nor Thompson fully understood how dramatically their dispute would escalate, or how their morning disagreement would soon become a defining moment in the ongoing evolution of the British monarchy. The peaceful gardens of Highgrove had become an unlikely battlefield where centuries of tradition clashed with modern expectations of personal autonomy. The outcome of this confrontation would resonate far beyond the gravel driveway where two strong-willed individuals continued their increasingly heated exchange. The tension reached its peak when Camilla yanked open the driver's door of the Range Rover with such force that it created a sharp metallic sound that echoed across the courtyard. The decisive action sent a clear message that she was done with negotiations and fully intended to drive herself to her sister's cottage, regardless of protocol or consequences. "Ma'am, I cannot allow this." Thompson's voice rose sharply, his military composure finally cracking under the pressure of an impossible situation. For the first time in his distinguished career, he found himself shouting at a member of the royal family, his words carrying across the estate grounds with startling clarity. The sound of Thompson's raised voice created a moment of shocked silence. Royal protection officers were trained to remain calm and controlled under all circumstances, speaking with respectful authority, but never losing their composure. The fact that Sergeant Major Thompson, known throughout the service for his unflappable demeanor, had actually shouted at the Queen Consort sent ripples of disbelief through everyone within earshot. Camilla paused halfway into the driver's seat, her expression shifting from determination to something approaching amazement. In all her years as a member of the royal family, no member of staff had ever raised their voice to her in such a manner. The breach of etiquette was so severe that it took several seconds for the full implications to register with everyone present. "Did you just shout at me, Sergeant Major?" Camilla's question was delivered with the kind of dangerous quiet that those familiar with royal displeasure knew to fear. Her voice carried the full weight of her position, reminding everyone present that regardless of the circumstances, she was still the Queen Consort and deserving of appropriate respect. Thompson's face flushed red as he realized the magnitude of his breach of protocol. His military training and years of royal service had instilled in him an absolute respect for proper behavior, and he had just violated one of the most fundamental rules of royal interaction. However, his genuine concern for Camilla's safety prevented him from simply apologizing and stepping aside. "Your Majesty, I sincerely apologize for raising my voice," Thompson said, his words coming rapidly as he tried to salvage the situation while still maintaining his position. "However, I cannot stand by and watch you place yourself in potential danger. If you leave Highgrove in an unprotected vehicle, I will have no choice but to report this incident immediately to your husband and to my superiors at Scotland Yard." The threat of involving King Charles added a new dimension to the confrontation. Camilla knew that her husband would be deeply concerned about any security breach, but she also understood that his support for her independence had grown stronger over the years. Charles had often expressed his own frustrations with excessive security measures and might well understand her position, even if he disagreed with her methods. "You may report whatever you feel necessary, Sergeant Major," Camilla replied, her tone becoming increasingly formal as the situation deteriorated. "However, you will not dictate my movements or threaten me with reports to my husband. I am a grown woman perfectly capable of making decisions about my own safety and well-being." The The standoff had attracted the attention of additional staff members, who watched the unprecedented scene with a mixture of fascination and horror. Mrs. Henley had descended from the house and stood at the main entrance, wringing her hands nervously as she observed the confrontation that was rapidly spiraling beyond anyone's control. James Worthington, the head gardener, had abandoned all pretense of working and stood openly staring at the dramatic scene unfolding before him. In 30 years of maintaining royal gardens, he had witnessed family disagreements, staff disputes, and the occasional protocol breach, but never anything approaching the intensity of the current confrontation. Thompson's radio crackled to life as other protection officers sought guidance on how to handle the situation. The chain of command was clear about most security threats, but no one had prepared for a scenario where the principal openly defied protection and a senior officer lost his composure so completely. The situation was rapidly approaching a point where higher authorities would need to intervene. "Ma'am." Thompson made one final attempt at negotiation, his voice strained with the effort of maintaining professional decorum. "Please consider the broader implications of your actions. Your safety is not just a personal matter. It affects the stability of the monarchy itself. If something were to happen to you during an unauthorized journey, the consequences would extend far beyond any inconvenience caused by proper security measures." Camilla's response was immediate and cutting. The monarchy's stability depends on its relevance to ordinary people, not on maintaining an artificial bubble that prevents genuine human connection. "My sister is unwell, and I intend to comfort her personally, not send a representative with a formal message of sympathy." The emotional core of Camilla's argument resonated with many of those present. Her desire to maintain authentic family relationships despite royal constraints reflected a very human struggle that transcended issues of protocol and security. However, Thompson's concerns about safety were equally valid, creating a conflict with no easy resolution. As the argument continued, other vehicles began arriving at Highgrove as word of the confrontation spread through royal protection networks. Senior officers who had been alerted to the unprecedented situation were converging on the estate to assess the crisis and determine appropriate responses. The simple family visit that Camilla had wanted to make privately was becoming a major security incident involving multiple agencies and departments. The Range Rover's engine remained silent, but Camilla made no move to exit the driver's seat. Her position behind the wheel had become symbolic of her determination to maintain some degree of personal autonomy within the constraints of royal life. Every passing moment that she remained in the vehicle represented a further challenge to established protocols and procedures. Thompson found himself caught between equally compelling duties. His oath to protect the royal family demanded that he prevent Camilla from leaving without proper security arrangements. However, his obligation to respect royal authority meant that he couldn't physically restrain the queen consort or remove her from the vehicle by force. The arrival of additional security personnel escalated the tension rather than resolving it. What had begun as a private disagreement between Camilla and Thompson was now becoming a public spectacle involving numerous staff members and attracting increasing attention from neighboring properties. The peaceful morning at Highgrove had transformed into a crisis that threatened to become a media sensation if word leaked beyond the estate grounds. Inside the house, King Charles remained unaware of the developing situation as he concluded his environmental meeting. The irony was not lost on those observing the confrontation that while the king focused on global sustainability issues, his wife was engaged in what amounted to a diplomatic crisis in their own driveway. The standoff had reached a point where neither side could easily back down without losing face. Camilla's commitment to visiting her sister had become intertwined with broader questions about royal independence and personal autonomy. Thompson's insistence on proper security protocols reflected not just professional duty but genuine concern for the Queen's safety and the stability of the institution he had sworn to protect. As morning turned toward afternoon, the confrontation showed no signs of resolution. The Range Rover sat like a green monument to royal stubbornness, while the growing crowd of security personnel represented the institutional forces that Camilla was challenging. The peaceful gardens of Highgrove had become the unlikely setting for a battle between personal freedom and protective duty that would soon capture the attention of the entire nation. The arrival of Chief Inspector Margaret Whitfield from Scotland Yard's Royalty Protection Command marked the official escalation of what had begun as a simple disagreement. Whitfield's reputation for handling delicate situations involving royal family members was legendary within law enforcement circles, and Her presence at Highgrove indicated that the situation had reached levels requiring the highest authority within royal security. Whitfield stepped out of her unmarked black sedan with the calm confidence of someone who had dealt with similar crises before, though perhaps never quite at this scale or with this level of public stubbornness from a senior royal. Her approach to the Range Rover was measured and deliberate, designed to project authority without appearing threatening or disrespectful to the Queen Consort. "Your Majesty," Whitfield began with a respectful nod toward Camilla, who remained firmly seated behind the wheel of her vehicle. "I've been briefed on the current situation, and I hope we can find a reasonable solution that addresses both your personal concerns and our security obligations." Camilla's response was immediate and sharp. "Chief Inspector, unless you intend to arrest me for the crime of wanting to visit my unwell sister, I suggest you instruct your officers to step aside and allow me to proceed with my journey. This has gone far beyond reasonable security measures and entered the realm of absurd overreaction." The confrontation had drawn the attention of staff throughout the estate, and several had begun discreetly recording the events on their mobile phones, recognizing the historic nature of what was unfolding. The sight of the Queen Consort refusing to exit her vehicle while surrounded by increasingly agitated security personnel was unprecedented in modern royal history. Thompson, still reeling from his earlier loss of composure, attempted to brief Whitfield on the morning's events, but his explanation was repeatedly interrupted by Camilla's pointed corrections and clarifications. The Queen's version of events painted a picture of excessive bureaucracy and unnecessary restrictions, while Thompson's account focused on legitimate security concerns and protocol violations. "Ma'am," Whitfield tried a different approach, her tone remaining professionally calm despite the growing tension. "Perhaps we could arrange for you to speak with your sister by telephone while we coordinate proper security for a visit later this afternoon. Lady Annabelle's well-being is certainly important, but your safety must remain our primary concern." Camilla's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Chief Inspector, I've been driving these roads for longer than some of your officers have been alive. I know every curve, every village, and every possible route to my sister's cottage. The idea that a 30-mile journey through peaceful countryside requires military-level coordination is precisely the kind of thinking that makes the monarchy appear disconnected from ordinary life." The reference to the monarchy's public image struck a nerve with Whitfield, who was acutely aware of recent polling data showing declining public support for royal institutions. The perception that the royal family lived in an artificially protected bubble, divorced from the realities that ordinary citizens faced daily, was becoming an increasingly significant public relations challenge. Inside the house, King Charles had finally been informed of the developing crisis by his private secretary, who had received urgent communications from multiple sources about the unprecedented confrontation in the driveway. Charles's initial reaction was one of disbelief, followed quickly by concern for both his wife's determination and the security implications of her stance. The king's emergence from Highgrove House created a momentary hush among the assembled security personnel and staff. Charles, dressed in his customary tweed jacket and still carrying papers from his morning meeting, surveyed the scene with the weary expression of someone who had dealt with similar displays of royal independence before, though perhaps not quite so publicly. "Darling," Charles addressed his wife with the gentle tone he reserved for their private moments. "Though the current circumstances were anything but private, perhaps we could discuss this situation calmly and find a solution that satisfies everyone's concerns." Camilla's expression softened slightly at her husband's approach, but her grip on the steering wheel remained firm. "Charles, your protection officers are treating me like a prisoner rather than a family member concerned about her sister's health. I refuse to accept that basic human decency must be sacrificed on the altar of security protocols." The king's position was delicate, caught between his understanding of his wife's frustrations and his responsibility to maintain the security measures that protected the entire royal family. His own relationship with royal protection had evolved over decades, and he had learned to work within constraints that he sometimes found excessive but understood to be necessary. "Chief Inspector," Charles addressed Whitfield while maintaining eye contact with Camilla, "what would be required to ensure my wife's safety during a brief family visit? Surely we can find a middle ground that addresses legitimate security concerns without turning a simple act of sisterly compassion into a state occasion." Whitfield's response outlined the standard security requirements for any royal movement beyond secured locations: advance reconnaissance of routes and destinations, coordination with local police forces, medical support standing by, and escort vehicles with trained protection officers. The list, while reasonable from a security standpoint, represented exactly the kind of elaborate preparation that Camilla was determined to avoid. You see, Camilla's voice carried a note of vindication as Whitfield detailed the requirements. What should be a simple drive becomes a military operation involving dozens of people and hours of preparation. This is precisely why I can't maintain authentic relationships with my family and friends. Everything becomes a production rather than a genuine human interaction. The media implications of the standoff were becoming increasingly clear to everyone involved. Word of the confrontation had already begun to leak beyond the immediate circle of estate staff, and several regional journalists were reportedly en route to investigate reports of an incident at Highgrove. The prospect of negative publicity surrounding what appeared to be royal family dysfunction was causing considerable anxiety among the protection team. Thompson, who had remained largely silent since Whitfield's arrival, made another attempt to explain his position. "Your Majesty, ma'am, our concerns are not about control or unnecessary restriction. Recent intelligence briefings have highlighted increased security risks facing all members of the royal family. The protocols we're asking you to follow exist because genuine threats require genuine precautions." Camilla's response revealed the depth of her frustration with the security apparatus that surrounded her life. "Sergeant Major, I understand that threats exist, but I refuse to live in such fear that I cannot comfort a family member without assembling a small army. The threats you speak of are far more likely to target public appearances and official functions than a private family visit to a cottage in the Gloucestershire countryside." The logical force of Camilla's argument was difficult to dispute, though security professionals were trained to prepare for unlikely scenarios rather than merely probable ones. The assessment of risk versus freedom had always been a delicate balance within royal protection, made more complicated by the individual personalities and preferences of those being protected. Charles attempted another approach, suggesting that Annabelle could be brought to Highgrove, where proper security could be maintained while still allowing the sisters to spend time together. However, Camilla rejected this solution as missing the entire point of her rebellion against excessive protocols and restrictions on normal family life. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, the standoff showed no signs of resolution. The Range Rover had become a symbol of royal determination versus institutional authority, with neither side willing to compromise their fundamental position. The peaceful estate grounds of Highgrove had been transformed into an unlikely battleground where the future relationship between the monarchy and its protection services was being decided in real time. The growing crowd of security personnel, estate staff, and arriving officials created an increasingly surreal atmosphere where a simple family visit had become a constitutional crisis involving the highest levels of royal protection and potentially the government itself. The irony was not lost on observers that what Camilla wanted most, a normal, spontaneous family interaction, was being prevented by the very measures designed to allow her to function as a senior royal. The confrontation had reached a point where resolution would require significant concessions from one side or the other, with implications that would extend far beyond the immediate situation and potentially reshape the relationship between royal autonomy and institutional security for years to come. The breaking point came when Camilla finally turned the key in the ignition, and the Range Rover's engine roared to life with a decisive rumble that sent shockwaves through the assembled security personnel. The sound represented more than mechanical function. It was a declaration of intent that could no longer be ignored or negotiated away through diplomatic conversation. Chief Inspector Whitfield's calm demeanor cracked for the first time as she realized that the Queen Consort was genuinely prepared to drive away regardless of security protocols, potential consequences, or the crowd of officials desperately trying to prevent what could become a major constitutional crisis. The situation had moved beyond protocol discussions and entered territory where immediate action was required. "Ma'am, please." Thompson's voice carried a note of desperation as he approached the driver's side window, his military bearing finally giving way to genuine human concern. "If you leave without protection, you're not just risking your own safety. You're potentially creating an international incident that could damage the monarchy's reputation for years to come." Camilla's response came through the partially open window, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding her vehicle. "Sergeant Major, the monarchy's reputation is damaged when we appear so disconnected from ordinary human emotions that we cannot comfort family members without creating a spectacle. I'm going to see my sister, and I'm going now. The Range Rover began moving slowly forward, forcing the security personnel to step aside or risk being struck by a vehicle driven by the Queen Consort herself. The surreal nature of the situation reached new heights as trained protection officers found themselves literally jumping out of the way of the person they were supposed to be protecting. King Charles stepped forward quickly, placing his hand on the passenger door handle in a final attempt to prevent his wife's departure. "Camilla, please, let's find another way. This confrontation has already gone too far, and continuing will only make things worse for everyone involved." The Queen's face softened as she looked at her husband through the passenger window, and for a moment it seemed that royal diplomacy might prevail over stubborn determination. However, her resolve proved unshakable as she explained her position one final time with quiet intensity that carried more weight than any shouting could have achieved. "Charles, I love you dearly, but I will not be a prisoner in golden chains. If the price of being Queen Consort is abandoning basic human decency and family loyalty, then perhaps we need to reconsider what this institution truly represents in the modern world." With those words, Camilla shifted the Range Rover into gear and drove slowly but deliberately away from Highgrove, leaving behind a scene of absolute chaos as security personnel scrambled to coordinate an emergency response to an unprecedented situation. The sight of the Queen Consort driving herself away from royal protection was unlike anything anyone present had ever witnessed. Thompson immediately activated his radio, alerting all units that the principal is mobile without protection and requesting immediate assistance from local police forces along potential routes to Lady Annabelle's residence. The emergency protocols designed for external threats were hastily adapted to handle the unique challenge of protecting someone who actively rejected protection. The aftermath of Camilla's departure was swift and dramatic. Within minutes, unmarked vehicles containing protection officers were discreetly following the Range Rover at a distance, while helicopter support was quietly mobilized to provide aerial surveillance of the Queen's journey. The irony was not lost on security professionals that they were now spending significantly more resources protecting Camilla than would have been required for a properly planned visit. Word of the incident spread rapidly through official channels, reaching Buckingham Palace, Downing Street, and Scotland Yard headquarters within hours. The implications of a senior royal rejecting protection and driving unescorted through public roads created immediate concerns about precedent, security vulnerabilities, and potential media exposure that could embarrass the monarchy. The drive to Annabelle's cottage took 47 minutes, during which Camilla maintained a steady speed and followed traffic laws meticulously, perhaps recognizing that any additional drama would only complicate an already extraordinary situation. Her journey was monitored by multiple agencies, though she appeared unaware of the extensive security net that had been hastily deployed around her route. Lady Annabelle Elliot, Camilla's sister, was completely unaware of the morning's dramatic events when the familiar green Range Rover pulled into her cottage driveway. The subsequent 3-hour visit proceeded normally, with the sisters enjoying tea, discussing family matters, and addressing Annabelle's minor health concerns that had prompted the original desire for a visit. Meanwhile, at Highgrove, King Charles found himself managing a crisis that threatened to overshadow his environmental initiatives and raise serious questions about family unity within the monarchy. Emergency meetings were convened with senior advisors to assess the situation's implications and develop strategies for managing potential media fallout. The security review that followed was swift and comprehensive. Sergeant Major Thompson faced formal questioning about his handling of the situation, though many colleagues privately admired his commitment to duty despite impossible circumstances. Chief Inspector Whitfield submitted detailed reports analyzing the breakdown in royal protection protocols and recommending policy changes to prevent similar incidents. Public reaction, when news of the confrontation eventually emerged, was surprisingly divided. Many citizens expressed support for Camilla's desire to maintain normal family relationships, viewing her actions as refreshingly human and relatable. Others criticized the security breach and questioned whether royal family members should be permitted to ignore professional protection advice. The incident prompted broader discussions about the balance between royal duty and personal freedom, with constitutional experts debating the implications of senior royals rejecting institutional oversight. Some argued that Camilla's actions demonstrated healthy independence, while others warned about dangerous precedents for royal security and protocol compliance. Media coverage was extensive but generally sympathetic to Camilla's position, with many outlets praising her commitment to family values and criticizing what they portrayed as excessive security restrictions. The Queen Consort's popularity actually increased following the incident, as public polling showed increased approval for her willingness to prioritize personal relationships over protocol. The long-term consequences of the Highgrove confrontation extended far beyond that dramatic October morning. Royal protection protocols were quietly revised to provide more flexibility for family visits, while maintaining essential security measures. Training programs were updated to help protection officers better navigate situations where royal preferences conflicted with security recommendations. Thompson and Camilla eventually reconciled their professional relationship, though their interaction remained formal and careful following the heated exchange that had tested both their limits. The sergeant major's career survived the incident, and he was eventually promoted to higher positions within Royal Protection Services, his experience providing valuable insights for handling similar situations. Chief Inspector Whitfield's comprehensive review of royal protection procedures led to policy changes that allowed for more streamlined security arrangements for low-risk family visits, addressing some of the concerns that had triggered Camilla's rebellion while maintaining appropriate safety measures. The Range Rover itself became something of a legend within royal circles, representing the successful assertion of personal autonomy within institutional constraints. Camilla continued to drive the vehicle regularly, though subsequent family visits were coordinated with appropriate security measures that balanced protection requirements with respect for personal preferences. King Charles ultimately supported his wife's position, understanding that her actions reflected genuine frustration with restrictions that sometimes prevented authentic human connections. His backing proved crucial in preventing more serious consequences and establishing new precedents for royal family autonomy within security frameworks. The incident at Highgrove became a defining moment in modern royal history, demonstrating that even senior members of the monarchy were willing to challenge institutional authority when fundamental personal values were at stake. Camilla's bold move sparked important conversations about the evolution of royal roles and responsibilities in contemporary society. Years later, the confrontation would be remembered not as a crisis of royal authority, but as a moment when institutional flexibility proved capable of adapting to human needs and desires. The sight of Queen Camilla driving away from Highgrove in her green Range Rover became a symbol of successful negotiation between traditional duty and modern expectations, proving that even centuries-old institutions could evolve when faced with compelling arguments for change. The peaceful resolution of what could have been a constitutional crisis demonstrated the underlying strength and adaptability of the British monarchy, showing that respectful disagreement and eventual compromise remained possible even when fundamental principles appeared to be in conflict. The Queen Consort's afternoon with her sister had ultimately cost far more in security resources and administrative complexity than a properly planned visit would have required. But the precedent it established for royal autonomy proved invaluable for future situations where personal and institutional interests might diverge.